Assalamualaikum and hi everyone. Welcome to IGSC's fourth episode, our podcast episode, where we dive deep into our topic today. So, what's our topic today? It's understanding the Section 17A of the MACC Act and what are trust principles. So, whether you're here to learn or just curious about what we are discussing today, we've got just something for each and every one of you today. So, I'm your host, I'm Iman, and I have two amazing speakers with me on this episode. So before we move on with our discussion, as usual, I definitely like to introduce our speakers today. So first up, we have Puan Nurirdzuana Ismail. So thank you for joining us here today, Puan Nuri.
Thank you for having me.
So Puan Nuri is a regular speaker and panelist at integrity and compliance conferences hosted at both local and international levels. So she is also a certified integrity officer ever since 2020 with biomedical technology background. Impressive background, Puan Nuri. But not just that, ladies and gentlemen. So before joining MACC, Puan Nuri has served the MACC as assistant commissioner, and she has also been the head of integrity and risk management for Group Integrity in Petronas. So in 2009, Puan Nuri was assigned to the National Key Result Areas and KRA Fighting Corruption for Government Transformation Program. And ever since then, Puan Nuri has led and involved in designing and implementing anti-corruption programs, corruption risk management, and other governance, risk and compliance training, including the implementation of anti-bribery management system in various government agencies and organizations. So currently, Puan Nuri is in MACC and she supports the BOD in providing oversight on the design of implementation, compliance, and enforcement of the MACC's anti-bribery corruption system, AML, CTF framework, and she works closely with all the stakeholders to ensure MACC uphold highest integrity in its business. And last but not least, currently Puan Nuri is the Deputy President of the Association of Certified Integrity Officer Malaysia and Transparency International. Thank you for joining us here again, Puan Nuri. Your background is a testament that women empowerment, it shouts women empowerment. Yeah, so moving on to our next handsome speaker today. So we have Encik Hatta Hashom. Am I right? Encik Hatta?
Yes, Encik Hatta Hashom.
Yes. So Encik Hatta, he is a consultant, trainer and lecturer with a rich academic, holding a diploma in teaching English for speakers of other languages from London Teachers Training College. He holds a bachelor's in human resource development and human psychology from UKM, and also a master's in strategic anti-corruption and integrity management from GUC. And Encik Hatta is also currently pursuing a PhD in governance, and he has 19 years of experience as an HR lecturer and risk officer working within public and private universities. So Encik Hatta, his diverse career roles such as a land negotiator for Koperasi Tabung Haji, business consultant in Japan, and head of student affairs and chief of Marcom at Meditrade. So Encik Hatta also formerly served as the lead consultant at Institute Integrity Malaysia, IIM, under the ABMS division in 2018. He consulted up to nearly 100 organizations. Amazing and impressive speaker we have. Later in 2020, he also founded the Hatta Hash Consultancy, or better known as HHC, and also Hatta Hash Academy, HHA, that offers several implementations such as governance, whistleblowing management system, internal investigation, anti-corruption advisory services, even including human resources related trainings across Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, and UAE. As a recognized expert in anti-corruption, Encik Hatta has been invited to lecture and speak at national and international conferences, and he currently serves on the advisory board for Trans Certification International. Last but not least, Encik Hatta is also the panel of experts for Cybersecurity Malaysia and Anti-Bribery and Anti-Corruption ABAC Excellent. And recently, in April, he was also appointed as an auditor for the Anti-Bribery Management Systems Association. Wow, there's a lot of acronyms and impressive achievements from our two amazing speakers today. So now that we all know their background, so we want to know and learn more from them, right? So let us jump straight into today's discussion. So my first very opening question would go to our gorgeous speaker today, Puan Nuri. So Puan Nuri, let's start with a broad overview for our listeners who may not be familiar with the legal jargon. Could you explain what Section 70A of the MACC Act is all about and how does it apply to public, private, and even charitable sectors?
Right. Thank you, Iman. So basically, the 17 capital A is just a new provision that has been introduced and passed in 2018. But corporations were given about 2 years, a grace period, to prepare themselves to making sure that they have adequate procedures to make sure that the organization is well governed and have all the adequate procedures. But before that, all the corruption incidences, conviction is focusing on individual. Because of that gap, hence the legal regulatory landscape in Malaysia have changed and transformed, and the focus is not just to the individual, but now also it fell into the organization. So for any commercial organization that is registered under Partnership or Companies Act, they can be held liable. And who is liable? Which the first is the controller of the company, the board of directors, the CEO, and the list goes on. And it focuses on the offering of bribery, meaning the offering of any gratification, because in our law, in MACC Act, it doesn't mention the word bribery or corruption. It will, all the types of gratification is well explained in Section 3. So for the listeners out there, basically, this new provision gives hope to the penalty or punishment to be focused to the corporation, and it is the way that we should transform the way we do business. And also, it demands corporates to be accountable and liable. So in the Section 17 capital A, it's not a new act. Again, it's just a provision in the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission Act. It's you can have a look at the Section 17A subsection 5, which also lists down on the guidelines of what commercial organisation can do to prepare and to make sure that they have the ability to prevent, detect and respond to corruption by having adequate procedures. And I think that is well explained in the trust principle. And I think I will leave it as is now, so that to give way to our next speaker to explain on the trust principle.
I see. Thank you so much, Nuri, for the oversight on what 17A is all about. So technically, it's on a corporate liability principle where a commercial organization can be considered guilty if any of its employee or other associates commits corruption within the organization itself. So it then transcends more than just an individual. Now it's just a whole organization as a whole can be liable on this anti-bribery or corruption matters, right? So I think this goes to my next question to Encik Hatta. The practical implications of this 17A, right? So what responsibilities do organizations have under Section 70A and in preventing bribery itself now that they're liable as a whole?
All right. Now, first and foremost, I would like to say thanks to IGSC, International Governance, Sustainability and Center for the lovely invitation. Now, let's just go straight to the Section 17 capital A, and of course, the so-called adequate procedure that has been stated under the subsection 5 of MACC Act. Now, before I go to the trust principle, Puan Moderator, I would like to emphasize a little bit more tentang the word corporate liability provision. Sebenarnya nama glamour dia adalah Section 17 capital A. Tapi ramai tak tahu sebenarnya kalau dia selak dalam kita punya Google, dia takkan jumpa perkataan Section 17 capital A. Kalau ada pun, nama dia yang sebenar adalah the MACC Act Amendment 2018. Glamournya dipanggil Section 17 capital A kerana section ini dia bawa pemberat kepada organisasi, particularly, dan juga awam. Bila mana nak melakukan ataupun nak melaksanakan, kalau ikut PMX kita meluncurkan the so-called implementation ni kepada organisasi awam, organisasi awam boleh buat, tidak ada masalah. Kita dapat buat dia sebagai best practices. Now, selain daripada Section 17 capital A, the MACC Act Amendment 2018, kita juga ada nama yang comel untuk section ini. Saya, kalau misal kata saya pergi engage dengan clients ataupun whomsoever, the stakeholders misalnya, Saya memang suka pakai istilah yang comel dan sangat orang kata apa manis, sebab kita tak nak meletakkan kejanggalan kepada section ini. Kita tak nak mewujudkan rasa tidak senang, sebab rata-rata orang di Malaysia ini mereka memikirkan kalau misal kata section itu adalah satu benda yang hukuman, punitive action ataupun punishment, the heavy one. No, kita tak nak macam tu, sebab setiap section ataupun akta yang diwujudkan di Malaysia yang didraftkan oleh drafter kita di bahagian haiwan undang, dia ada spirit dia yang tersendiri. So section 17 capital A ini ataupun section the corporate liability provision ini, dia punya spirit adalah komitmen oleh pihak organisasi swasta bagi menunjukkan bahawasanya dia ada elements of PDC. P means prevent, kita nak mengelak. D means detect. Let's say kalau kita dah mengelak tapi ada juga kita identify, kita detect. And last but not least, C, the very last C adalah kita correct it. So prevent, detect and correct. Dia macam juga dengan risk management punya spirit. So dalam corporate liability provision ini, the word liability di bawah section ini tidak didefinisikan. Kami juga, saya rasa seramai konsultan ataupun sesiapa sahaja organisasi particularly masih menanti mungkin pada lepas 5 ke 10 tahun kita akan ada, kita panggil review of this section. Perkataan ataupun kosakata liability ni kita boleh define di dalam perundangan kita supaya kita tahu apakah aspek tanggungjawab dan juga kita panggil accountability yang harus dijalankan oleh organisasi ini, iaitu organisasi swasta. Sebab penting saya rasa kita define the word liability itu, barulah kita akan dapat the gist of the so-called reasonableness dan adequacy when it comes to procedures and policies yang kita nak bangunkan sebagai kawalan dalam organisasi. Now let's go to the subsection 5 seperti mana yang Puan Nuri sebut tadi. Dalam section itu, dia telah the so-called preventive measures yang telah diletakkan. Di mana this adequate procedure ataupun nama penuh dia, the Ministerial Guideline on Adequate Procedure ini, dia telah menetapkan ada 5 prinsipal yang harus setiap organisasi swasta di Malaysia jalankan, kuatkuasakan, review ataupun buat semakan dan sentiasa monitor ataupun sustain the so-called progression dalam syarikat. Now, it lies dalam akronim TRUST, trust. Bukan trust kepercayaan, tetapi ialah sekadar akronim untuk dia nak melebarkan lagi kefahaman tentang prinsipal 1 sehingga prinsipal 5. Prinsipal 1 kita tahu adalah top level commitment, manakala prinsipal yang kedua risk assessment, the R, and the third one U adalah undertake control measures. Ada measures di situ ya. Ramai orang ingat kalau ambil saja satu part kita dah boleh settle that particular liability. No. There is a reason why the word measure itu telah dipluralkan ataupun dijamakkan. Maksudnya more kawalan yang kita kena bangunkan. And the fourth one adalah S, systematic, review, monitoring and enforcement. Dan yang terakhir adalah the T, which is training and communication. So I'm not going to go further because I think we have like 45 minutes to go one by one. Kita nak masuk ke dalam, and I'm sure that kita punya pendengar hari ni, dia nak dengar dengan, orang kata apa, dengan lebih jelas dan lebih teliti tentang what are these items have to do with the control measures of a corporate organisation.
I see. Thank you, Cik Hatta. So what you're trying to say is that these trust principles are organization for a preventive measure of 17A. Am I right?
Yep.
I see. So if we can, if I like to extend that question to Puan Nuri, how does this trust principles work? If you can elaborate a half part of how it's applied.
Sure. Well, basically like what Encik Hatta mentioned just now, it's all about commitment. And I like the acronym TRUST because it does take an experience and action and a result to create that trust environment in a way. And a lot of organization is having a culture of trust deficit in which they do not want to speak up or use the whistleblowing channel and whatnot. But coming back to this corporate liability provision, I think I would like to share about what happens if you do not follow, the penalties and whatnot. So for the particular provision, there will be a penalty for up to 1 million or 10 times of the value, whichever is higher. and it's imprisonment up to 20 years. And this goes to the director, even though the director of the company or the board of the board or even the C-suite of the company did not commit such act of or offense of bribery or corruption. But still, if the company or commercial organization is found not to have that adequate procedures or the risk assessment specifically on corruption and bribery, and then not having the right monitoring system and measures plus enforcement, because a lot of controls that normally companies have, they would have the policy, the procedure and whatnot, but probably the enforcement is lacking. And sometimes the culture of training and awareness is also lacking.
Right.
So somehow for my organization, what we are trying to do is, because from the law itself, from the provision, I'm sure everyone out there, after 4 years of experiencing this corporate liability provision enforcement, they wouldn't know how adequate is adequate for their company. They don't know is ABC, anti-bribery corruption statement is enough, or policy itself is enough, or having a corruption risk assessment is enough, or having such training for the internal stakeholder and the external stakeholder. Will it be suffice to the regulator? If something happened, they will come and check. So what I would strongly suggest to all the organization out there to consider to adopt the ISO 37001 anti-bribery management system, because it is an international standard. It has such measurements and against the validation of applicable laws, not just limited to MACC Act, but also it will extend to FCPA and British Standard and whatnot. So at least there will be check and balance. There will be certification body who will come and audit and do the monitoring, reviewing, and the enforcement part. So for my practice, my best practice, I would strongly recommend companies to at least consider, if you don't want to be certified, to consider to use all the requirements in the ISO of 37001 anti-bribery management system.
I see. So if I'm right, by implementing this ISO 37001, would it be right for me to say that now the floating term of how adequate is adequate in your company would fulfill?
Well, at least there's some measurement, because the ISO standard will require PDCA, plan, do, check, act cycle. Okay. And then there will be external and internal assurance, monitoring, audits and whatnot with the management review. So there's a cycle of it. It's a systemic approach to the controls. So I would say that by having the ISO 37001, it confirms that corruption and bribery will not happen. That is not true. But at least it will minimize the risk of the exposure of it to happen. So in Malaysia, there are 4 main offences in MACC Act to consider. The list can expand, but the 4 main offences is bribery, giving and receiving, and then falsification of document, plus abuse of position. But on top of that, collusion, leakage of information that leads to other corruption offences can lead to all this improper conduct that happens in the company. So you just, I would encourage organization out there to identify what are the potential risks of corruption that they may have in each of the key function and roles and departments and division or business unit that they have in the company, and specifically identify the control on ABC for that particular risk.
I see. Interesting input there, which then goes to my next question to Encik Hatta. Given now in your many years of experience in this dalam bidang ni, Encik Hatta, so do you mind berkongsi sedikit if kalau ada any experience that you've encountered working for an organisation or a company, trying to advise them, like how should they mitigate their risks aside from them having these ISOs in place? Like, have you consulted them directly when they already have this trouble occurred in the organisation or company?
I see.
Yeah.
Baik.
Subject to PNC.
Sure. Now, saya kalau misal kata saya dapat berterus terang lah dekat mungkin pendengar-pendengar ataupun yang sedang melihat kita di podcast ini, nasihat saranan saya tu, bila mana anda ingin orang kata apa, go for implementation of ABMS ataupun adequate procedure both ways. First thing first, you're going to have to consider the perundangan. Ingat, perundangan always come first. Okay? Kalau kita tengok airbag framework kita, kita ada the pyramid of authority. The very first layer memang perundangan, the laws, applicable laws and regulation. Then after that, the second part kita ada government policy. The third one kita ada the organisation policy itself. Kita juga kena pay respect to the organisation because dia juga carry compliance. Dan yang terakhir barulah the ISO best practices. Benar apa yang Puan Nuri cakap sebentar tadi, paling tidak okay, bila mana kita ada sistem ISO 37001 itu, ia dapat membantu kita untuk clear the mind, lebih jelas tentang apa yang kita buat. Kerana dalam setiap, kalau ABMS tu kita ada clauses, dia telah menetapkan the one husband, kami selalu panggil one husband five wife lah, the one H dengan five W tu, untuk terangkan satu persatu apakah tindakan yang boleh dilakukan bagi tujuan preventif, detektif dan korektif. Bagaimana kita berespon. Sekarang ini kalau misal kata the ABMS, the Section 17 Capital A tidak ada lagi, belum lagi terbina. Bayangkan pada ketika dulu kita hanya mengharapkan kes itu terjadi terlebih dahulu.
Correct.
Penguatkuasa datang untuk buat charges and what not. So itu agak terlambat. Tujuan risk assessment ataupun risk management dilakukan kerana kita nak versus benda itu dengan krisis. Krisis sebelum, krisis lepas. So alangkah baiknya kalau sesebuah organisasi itu yang dikatakan mempunyai kecekapan, tata kelola, governance-nya yang baik, mereka dapat menyediakan satu, kita panggil preventive measures from the very beginning untuk to ensure that semua perkara yang kita telah kenal pasti sebagai potensi risiko rasuah ataupun improper conduct, so to say, dapat kita panggil apa, dapat kita sediakan kawalan dan seterusnya the treatment ataupun pengubatan itu dapat kita lakukan. So yang pertama adalah perundangan. Yang kedua, untuk pihak organisasi swasta di luar sana, always consider you punya destination. Dekat sini saya tengok ramai orang nak start dengan ABMS. Tak sabar, maklumlah syarikat kita ada bajet. Tapi ingat, duit bukan segala-galanya kalau kita tak jelas dengan kita punya intention, kita punya destination. So you need to put forward your destination. Yes, today mungkin hari ini anda cakap anda nak buat corruption risk assessment. Mungkin anda nak tengok part conflict of interest terlebih dahulu. Ataupun nak tengok whistleblowing. Whistleblowing ni paling glamour lah sekarang. Kesini kesana semua nak bercakap tentang benda tu. Betul ke tak salah kita pun tak pasti. Tetapkan destinasi dulu. Yang mana kita nak go for. Whether it is adequate procedure dahulu ke, nak memastikan adanya policy dan prosedur terlebih dahulu. Lepas tu tengok the formatting and of course the reports and what not. Ataupun you nak go for certification. Macam nasihat saya selalu kata, start small. The baby step that determine everything at the end of the day. Sebab jangan kita terlalu nak cekau semua benda. Kita nak dapatkan yang besar. Sebab bila sebut ABMS ni, Puan Moderator dan juga Puan Nuri, kita tengok semua orang sukakan sijil itu. Sebab mereka telah set dalam minda masing-masing, sijil itu dapat mengelakkan, malah mungkin dapat melepaskan mereka daripada charges ataupun kesalahan yang mereka telah lakukan. Itu adalah satu, saya kata anekdot yang salah lah. Pemahaman yang salah. Di mana sebenarnya sijil itu bukanlah satu bentuk immunity kepada syarikat. Okay? Yang kita nak tengok kat sini, persijilan tu maksudnya sudah ada pemeriksaan dan juga kita panggil kecukupan dalam polisi dan prosedur. Itu saja. No more, no less. Tapi itulah, bila mana pemahaman itu tidak betul, maka mereka lebih senang untuk petik jari dan dapatkan sesuatu tanpa memikirkan tentang perjalanan sepatutnya the implementation. ABMS ataupun adequate procedure ini sebenarnya kita nak bercakap tentang penghayatan, internalization of that system untuk kita menjadikan dia culture terbaik dalam syarikat. Yang ini yang kita kena faham. Kalau kita ada semua benda sekalipun, kita mampu untuk sort of like going for budgets and what not, tapi sebenarnya the penghayatan is not there. I would totally say that better you wrap it up and you put you balinglah into the drain rather than that, because you tak boleh cakap kami just nak melengkapkan sahaja proses NACP, the Section 17 Capital A and what not. It won't work that way. Okay, so konsep asalnya, dasarnya adalah whether or not every single thing yang kita buat itu reasonable. And to what extent kita boleh ensure yang setiap perkara yang disentuh itu mencapai khalayak kita, the stakeholders, pihak-pihak berkepentingan dalam dan luar syarikat kita. Itu paling penting. Dan yang terakhir, kalau saya boleh campur satu lagi yang paling penting dalam pelaksanaan ataupun journey kita ke destination untuk mendapat compliance terbaik adalah pastikan individu yang terlibat, baik mereka adalah task force, auditor ataupun yang memimpin sistem ini, mestilah berkompeten. Kenapa saya sebut kompeten? Because without knowledge, you won't go anywhere, because you will know satu hari tu kaki you akan tersepak, you jatuh, you tak mampu nak buat apa-apa. Ini saya selalu bagi analogi. So you need the knowledge, and of course utilize the knowledge in terms of strengthening up the so-called implementation ataupun certification you want to go for. Yang tu yang penting. Sebab pegawai atau mungkin C-level, top management atau board yang tidak berkompeten akan menjadi pemusnah kepada airbag ataupun anti-bribery, anti-corruption compliance di syarikat.
I see. Interesting knowledge that I gained today. This area is still new to me, to be honest. So if I'm understanding it right, Cik Hatta, so sijil ABMS ni, I know it's not a green card for immunity, but does it mean that any company or organization who just have the fund, technically they can just get the sijil ABMS, or is there a certain checklist that they need to do before they can get the sijil?
That question goes to me.
Yeah.
Okay, now at some point people can say that they can easily buy the sijil.
Correct.
That is totally wrong.
Okay.
Sebab
I assume that as well.
di Jabatan Standard Malaysia kita, bila mana sesebuah organisasi yang telah mendapat akreditasi kepada untuk menjadi certification body or certifying the syarikat, dia dah ada the so-called criteria.
Okay.
So mereka bila ada kriteria itu 17021/1, itu kriteria yang dipakai untuk tengok the so-called clients mereka untuk dapatkan certification. Mereka kena memenuhi kriteria itu terlebih dahulu. Dan setelah itu barulah mereka kena memenuhi kriteria lain. Saya seronok sebab sesetengah, ni statement kontroversi ni, nanti Cik Hatta tak disukai ramai. Sesetengah certification body pada penghayatan saya, mereka cukup bagus kerana mereka meletakkan perundangan di hadapan. Ramai orang tidak sedar bila membuat pembacaan ISO ABMS harus hadir bersama the perundangan. Kalau kita nak checklist, kalau let's say puan ni kita ada satu checklist untuk kita tanda apakah sama ada kita cukup atau tak cukup untuk dapat certification ini. Ramai orang boleh tanda checklist itu dengan baik sekali kalau ikut ISO. Kenapa? Sebab template itu boleh dibeli.
Right.
You see? Tetapi the perundangan has stated that ini semua yang the so-called checklist tu mesti dihayati. Bagaimana menghayati? Then comes the word compliance. Dan juga adherence, you yourself to devote yourself to the so-called policies, procedures and whatnot tu. Now, di sini yang saya kata penting untuk orang faham bila mana nak dapat ABMS, it has to come together. The ISO and of course the perundangan. Sebab perundangan dia ada pula part-part tertentu yang dia akan alirkan kita balik kepada kita punya basis sebagai rakyat Malaysia yang harus mengikut peraturan-peraturan tertentu. So pada saya, kalau bisa kata kita nak pergi kepada ISO, yes, it can go for checklist. Kita boleh buat benda itu, tidak ada masalah. Cuma make sure setiap apa yang kita lakukan itu mesti didasar, dia punya bottom line adalah perundangan. Di sini kalau ramai orang tak tahu dalam ABMS sebenarnya ada disebut apa sahaja compliance yang nak dibangunkan hendaklah membantu untuk syarikat mencapai dia punya legal obligation. Tapi ramai orang tak tahu benda ni, dia nak go for benda yang sedang. Sebab tu saya kata peranan konsultan, peranan CIGO, Chief Integrity or Governance Officer sangat penting dalam mentafsir jalan sebenar untuk kita mendapat pencapaian kepada compliance kepada perundangan dalam masa yang sama the ISO itself.
Okay, now I understand a bit more on how this compliance is reached at the end of an organisation. So I think this goes to my next question to Puan Nuri. Tadi waktu Encik Hatta ada explain all this, he mentioned about this certain hayati dan devotion.
Internalization.
Internalization, yes, in another word. So how do you relate that word into part of the trust principles?
Well, before that, I must say, just to add, because we are still talking about the corporate liability provision, it's not limited to just director, controller, or even employees of the company, but it does extend to the person or anyone that performs service on behalf of the company. That means even if the act of corruption is not done by your own employee or your own director, and suddenly, let's say if you have agent, intermediaries, or even your dealers, for example, the liability of that provision can still extend to them for offering of gratification.
And this falls under 17A as well.
Correct. 17 capital A. So maknanya kalau macam you ada dealer and then your dealer pergi kau team dengan some government officer ke apa ke, dia pergi bagi rasuah, and then kalau kena tangkap, first dia akan tanya, this company that you represent, do they have some sort of adequate procedure? Tak ada tak polisinya? Ada tak diberitahu kat you, give training, awareness towards you and whatnot. So I think with having ISO 37001, it's not just enough if the company have the funds, they can do it. No. Actually, it needs commitment, internalization and ownership. Because if the board does not give any approval to the company, even though company have a lot of money and board kata no, we don't believe in anti-bribery management system, then CIGO or Chief Integrity Governance Officer cannot do anything.
Right.
But to have the system, at least it gives hope. Even corporate liability provision also gives hope to all the integrity officer out there. Because I've been in this field for over 20 years and I'm actually the first batch for certified integrity officer. And that was in 2010. By then, there were no corporate liability provision, and it is really, really difficult to get the buy-in from the top management to even have a simple training session on anti-corruption. They will definitely say, oh no, we are not corrupt. So why are you telling us all this? Why are you telling us of the cases and whatnot? But then I had to use like other law, like the Foreign Corrupt Practice Act, FCPA, 1977, because it was there since 1977, and it is extraterritorial. So for any company who uses US dollars, US instrument like the banks, the email and whatnot, if they corrupt, they offer bribe and whatnot, definitely they will be exposed. Tak kira lah, no matter if the company is in Malaysia or your transaction is in Timbuktu or whatnot. So to me, I think the main thing is clearly stated in the trust principle. Number one, the top leadership commitment. So when the top leadership commitment means they agree to have some sort of control, the framework to make sure that anti-bribery controls and elements are implemented and embedded as part of the culture in the company. And then the commitment to have and assign integrity officer who is independent with status and authority to discharge their duties. Because that is the main challenge now. Sometimes it just go by name. You are the integrity, head of integrity officer or CHIGO, whatever. But the reporting line, on paper, solid line to the board of directors. But the reality, everything has to go through certain management level. So that one really takes a bold commitment from the controller of the company, which is the board and the rest of the management. Because why they have to be independent is because we want to avoid the perceived conflict of interest and also intervention, influence by the top. So just now you were mentioning about whistleblowing, and it's something that is hot in the market, like companies, how they want to handle whistleblowing, because there's a difference between whistleblowing channel and also complaint channel. And then Whistleblowing Protection Act and also the other policies in the company, because the law will definitely supersede the policy of the company.
Correct.
So some companies, they will go to the extent they do not want to forward it to the authority. But if anything happen, if the person who do something wrong, they just resign, we can't do anything. We just lost track of them.
It just ends there.
It just ends there. And then it will give a perception to the rest of the employee, anyone can just be corrupt, take company's money, collude with the third party and leave the company happily or join other company, right? So, but if the company takes the commitment to say that, okay, any corruption element that has been reported in the company must be forwarded to the right authority. At least if they leave the company, the authority will still continue with the investigation.
Correct.
And as a company, we have to show that we have a good practice. Being ethical, we should cooperate with the regulator. We should have that good relationship with the regulator and keep abreast with whatever updates from the regulator. I'm not saying it because I was an MACC officer, no. But I think it is needed. It is very much needed, to have that understanding. Hence, that's why training and awareness does not limit to just the employees, but it has to be something that is mandatory for the directors of the company, must have that session on training and awareness, and plus to the third party, to the external, to the contractors, suppliers, vendor, you name it. So that at least, for example, in the top leadership commitment also in the principle, it says that you must establish a certain policy or policy statement that sets the behavior of the organization. So if you want the company to behave as such, you want people to have business with you to behave similarly. That means to have a zero tolerance to corruption and bribery and yada yada. Those kind of commitment. Like Cik Hatta said just now, it's about something that it needs to be the penghayatan, right? The internalization, which is true. I mean, it shouldn't be just on paper. It has to be beyond that. It has to be beyond compliance. And that's why the word integrity is powerful. Because integrity is the wholesome of doing good at all times, even no one is watching. So I think the concept of commitment, internalization, ownership, accountability is not just for IGU or CIGO, IGU Integrity Governance Unit, Chief Integrity Officer, but it goes to the rest of the company plus the third party and whoever that the business interact with. So that we can achieve sustainability in doing business. We can prolong doing business without paying so much penalty. And
I agree with you, Panuri. Even in trust principle, we just went into the first principle, which is top level commitment. And although it states top level commitment, but we understand now that it transcends more than just the top boards. It extends to everyone. Where being ethical should be put up front. Definitely. So this goes to the next principle, Cik Hatta. Like if you can elaborate more, probably in the next principle, which is the risk assessment, or maybe also connected to the third principle, which is undertake control measures. What do you think about it?
Baik. Now, corruption risk assessment. Some call it corruption risk management, some call corruption risk assessment. Kalau saya masih ingat, 2-3 tahun lepas, ada satu libat urus dibuat di peringkat jabatan standard, mempersoalkan, membincangkan dan at the end of the day mencapai kata sepakat tentang apa itu corruption risk assessment dan apa pula bezanya dengan corruption risk management. Isunya tak adalah besar mana pun, tetapi ialah bila mana kita nak mencapai satu perkara tu, kita kena jelas dengan definasinya. Now, corruption risk assessment ni, kalau kita tengok dalam trust principle pun dia pakai the terms risk assessment. Kalau kita tengok di buku rujukan kita yang pertama sebelum wujudnya MS 2764, buku 31,000 juga digunakan dalam 37,001 untuk ISO ABMS. Sebelum ini kita dah ada satu buku yang kita pakai, memang kebanyakan negara pakai untuk rujukan, adalah Global Compact Corruption Risk Assessment Development. Buku dicomel warna merah tu. Dia menerangkan tentang sequence bagaimana kita harus membangunkan corruption risk assessment ataupun risk assessment yang berlandaskan kepada elemen korupsi ataupun kerasuhan dalam syarikat. Kalau mengikut trust principle, memang sebuah syarikat tu dia the term is established. Mereka kena membangunkan, memperkenalkan dan memastikan ia menyentuh this corruption risk ni. Dia nak buat assessment tu, the word assessment tu dia ada 3 formula dia dalam risk assessment tu ada 3. RI, RA, RE. RI stands for risk identification, RA stands for risk assessment, and RE stands for risk evaluation. Whereby these 3 items ni selepas kita lengkapkan dalam proses tertentu, kita boleh pluskan dia. Selepas itu pula kita kena bangunkan risk treatment. Tidak kurang tidak lebih, sama saja dengan proses dalam ISO 31,000 risk management. Now, bila kita nak bangunkan corruption risk assessment ni, pertama-tamanya adalah kita kena make sure di peringkat syarikat kita kena dapatkan bai'ah daripada pihak pengurusan atasan terlebih dahulu. saya just nak terang kat sini, nak tekankan kat sini. Kenapa? Sebab isu corruption ni satu isu yang sangat sensitif. Mana-mana orang, mana-mana tempat, mana-mana kawasan, bila berbincang tentang hal ini, of course, kalau orang itu tidak mempunyai knowledge yang cukup ataupun mungkin tidak di aware, what is the word aware, tidak disedarkan dengan benda ni, mereka akan katakan bahawasanya, oh, jangan buat perkara tu, jangan buat risk assessment sebab you seolah-olah membuka pekung di dada syarikat. Tapi itulah, orang bila mana dia dapat saja penekanan ataupun pendapat seperti itu masalah dia yang paling utama. Sebenarnya corruption risk assessment ni kita mengkaji potensi corruption yang berlaku dalam syarikat. Kita tidak mengkaji events ataupun incidents. Sebab dia punya spirit of corruption risk assessment ni adalah untuk kita, setelah kita assess, kita bangunkan apa? Kawalan additional mungkin, ataupun kita memperbaiki kita punya existing atau kawalan sedia ada. Itu spirit asalnya. Tetapi rata-rata tak nak buat ataupun mungkin reluctant, kurang berminat dan kurang mahu untuk melakukan, membangunkan this corruption risk assessment because of dia punya stigma masyarakat satu lagi dia punya pendapat tentang kita macam buka pekung di dada macam saya sebut tadi kan. Saya nak bagi tahu dekat khalayak pada hari ini bahawasanya corruption risk assessment ini adalah satu benda yang sangat terpuji. Sebab kita mengkaji satu benda sebelum berlakunya sesuatu benda yang tidak diingini ataupun mungkin satu benda yang besar lebih boleh berlaku. So, tanam dalam minda masing-masing, corruption risk assessment kita assess potensi corruption ataupun kebarangkalian, kemungkinan. Kita sebut probability. Bila mana sesuatu perkara tu kita jangkakan akan berlaku. Bukannya kita berbincang ataupun menghangatkan kembali kes-kes lepas dan sebagainya. Di peringkat workshop, saya akan nasihatkan klien saya ataupun syarikat-syarikat untuk kalau misal kata juga ada incidents ataupun events yang mereka nak highlight dalam corruption risk assessment, boleh. Cuma camouflagekan dia menjadi dalam bentuk dalam bentuk potensi. Kerana pada akhir nanti kita nak merawat. Bukan tujuan kita untuk luka lama berdarah kembali ke nak buka itu, nak buka ini, tak ada. Jangan set macam tu. Yang itu yang menyebabkan nanti dia akan bawa satu konotasi yang lain, konotasi negatif kepada pihak pengurusan atasan. Now, risk assessment ini kalau kita tengok bukan setakat, kalau kita tengok dia punya deeming entitlement untuk bangunkan risk assessment ni bukan sekadar department ataupun pekerja-pekerja di bahagian tengah, pertengahan dan bawah sahaja. Ramai orang ataupun banyak syarikat buat salah tentang hal ni. Dia kena faham konteks corruption ini, bila kita nak assess, kita sedang mengakses manusia. Yang berbuat rasuah itu adalah manusia. Bukannya benda yang bukan hidup. Jadi bila kita tengok di peringkat syarikat, manusia ini diduduk dalam setiap deskripsi tugas. Baik duduk di peringkat department, division dan juga units. So saya menyarankan agar syarikat dia pergi kepada layer paling bawah sekali. Kerana kita tahu bila orang nak buat rasuah ni, kalau ada peluang, ada ruang, ada konsep rasionalisasi dia, ada pressure, mereka boleh berbuat rasuah. Oleh yang demikian, sepatutnya assessment itu yang saya sebut tadi, formula tu RIRERERT tu berlaku di peringkat paling bawah dan bawah dia kena escalate ke atas. Dan untuk pengetahuan sekalian, kalau betul-betul kita faham, kita tahu dan kita betul-betul berhemah dengan buku ABMS and Adequate Procedure sehingga ke tahap Board of Directors pun kena buat corruption risk assessment. Tapi hari ini bila mana saya buat audit, kita buat gap analysis, kita tak nampak 5% daripada syarikat buat corruption risk assessment kepada Board of Directors. Dia tak bawa, dia tak, sebab masih ada lagi dalam minda mereka mengatakan, board tak payah buat kot sebab board tu dah jawatan tertinggi sangat.
Right.
Guys, speak no more, buat hari ni. Kenapa? Ya puan. Kenapa board kena buat? Sebab dia juga adalah seorang manusia biasa. Dia konsep dia dalam rasuah ni mudah sahaja. Selagi mana individu itu bernama manusia, dia datang dengan dua peranti ataupun perkakasan. Satu, kalau kita tengok dari segi nilai integriti, ethos masyarakat, manusia ni dia datang dengan dua benda dalam diri dia. Satu, Tuhan bagi kat dia built in. Built in dalam diri dia kita panggil al-nafs ataupun nafsu. Satu lagi Tuhan bagi eksternal kat dia satu. Apa dia? Yang duduk sebelah kiri duduk berbisik tu. Syaitanir rajim tu lah. Okay. Kedua-dua ini sebenarnya membantu dia untuk mungkin daripada part-part tertentu untuk mencuba benda-benda yang mungkin dia against ataupun contradict to the law ataupun religion or what not. So di sini yang saya sebut kata tadi, kalau nak buat assessment, you kena betul-betul melihat kepada you kena pergi kepada very specific one dan pergi kepada setiap peringkat. Bukan sekadar keluarkan arahan, bagi tahu dekat staff kena buat. Benda tu akan jadi separuh sahaja. Tapi ramai orang tak nampak benda ni. Kalau saya boleh bagi hari ni, sebab kita nak bagi takeaways juga kepada khalayak kita, betul? Buka ABMS, jangan ingat perundangan saja kita tengok interpretasi. Kita tengok interpretasi dalam ABMS, dalam setiap pematuhan, dia letakkan di situ, the organisation shall determine. The organisation shall decide. The organisation shall implement, shall establish. Balik kepada dia punya interpretasi, clause 3, tengok the word organisation. So kalau kita tengok the word organisation kat 3.25, memang tertera di situ that organisation sebenarnya membawa makna yang besar daripada directors kepada employees, kepada partners, kepada volunteers dan juga kepada siapa? Pekerja sementara. Kalau kita di Malaysia, kita panggil di Malaysia ni konteks kita intern pun kena buat. Macam tu, sampai ke tahap itu yang kita kena buat. Bukan tujuan untuk nak jadi rigid ke tidak. Tapi batas di sini apa? Kita manusia, kita mempunyai potensi untuk membuat rasuah. Sebab itu assessment itu harus pergi ke dalam dan harus dibuat dengan penuh bermakna. Puan Nuri?
Okay, I would like to add on the principle number 2. It is very close to my heart and I think it helps me to do a lot of things in my work. So, risk assessment is about managing uncertainty. A lot of organisation, they become a bit like Cik Hatta said, afraid, defensive and whatnot when it comes to corruption risk assessment or management. So basically, do not be afraid. Actually, the CRM, if you do not know how to do it, you can refer to MS 2764. Jabatan Standard have already introduced the guidelines for using Malaysian context and also in accordance to the ABMS guidance and whatnot. It has been developed, it has been published. Everybody can have access to it. MS 2764. And then like what Cik Hatta said, I totally agree. You cannot be selective when you want to do the risk assessment. It has to be across the company. So like my company, we do for all the division, department, inclusive of board of directors. And even the smallest role in the company, even at the security level, because you will never know where the risk exposure will be. And plus, you need to also identify the personnel in critical position. So, because this subject is very close to my heart, my tips to the listener would be, when you want to identify the corruption risk, look at who they interact with. Whether is it a public official or contractors, vendors, suppliers, what is the capability? And then in line with the fraud triangle, they can use that also, like identifying the opportunities, capability, and also rationalization in each of the personnel in critical function. And number 2, what they should look for is probably like what has been mentioned. Sometimes they use the past cases to evaluate the risk, but when it's already happened, it's not a risk anymore, it's an event. But you can always use it as part of the identifying the scheme or the modus, the MO of the corruption happening. Like how do they establish a good relationship with the vendor, for example, when it comes to the risk of selecting preferred vendors, for example. So it is very important to have a collective workshop and discussion when it comes to risk identification. It's not the responsibility of conducting corruption risk assessment is not just on IGU, it's not on the integrity governance unit, but it has to be orchestrated across the company. It has to be discussed at length with the head of function and look at the business activities, the project, the transaction that will be involved and who they will be interacting with. Then they can be able to identify the right control to mitigate the risk. And another thing that I would like to give a tip is to ensure that when they identify the control, it's not just too generic. Like for example, the control to prevent corruption by having ABC policy is sufficient. It's not. It has to go to the extent where they have to identify a specific control with a specific role and specific functions that they have. And it has to be updated regularly. So according to 17 capital A subsection 5, it has to be reviewed every 3 years. But my suggestion, best practice to be reviewed every year.
Puan Nuri, if I may add to that, so reviewing that, would that fall under the principle S?
No, it's
No.
under
Still R.
Still R.
I see.
The
It doesn't-
requirement.
I see. We wouldn't like apply to both at the same time, like monitoring and enforcement, giving it.
Well, basically for R, it has been mentioned specifically that corruption risk must be reviewed at least
3 years.
every 3 years. But 3 years for me, I think is a bit too long because there will be movement, there will be change in business,
Restructuring.
there will be restructuring, there will be emerging risks of that particular department. And when they change business, they change leadership, there could be some changes in the decision and even in the culture. So best practice would be every year or else every 2 years. But for my company, for now, because we use AI as well, we're a bit advanced because technology and solution can. So every quarter.
I see.
And as and when needed.
I see. Would that, from this advanced technology and what has been implemented in your current practice now, what are the common challenges and criticism face?
Well, I must say when to start the whole exercise of identifying corruption risk, it was a bit hoo-ha. But you really need to have that, qualification and competency as like myself, I'm the Chigo. You really have to have that competency to build that rapport with every division. But number one, of course, you must get the buy-ins from the board for you to actually run that exercise and make sure you have the knowledge. And if you don't have the knowledge, get help from consultant. But in my case, because it's my favorite topic, my favorite subject, so I do it myself. And then it's not just you alone doing it as a compliance officer. It has to be discussed in a bigger group because they would know what are their exposure. They would know what kind of transaction will take place. They would know what is their operation like and the culture of that particular task or projects that they are going to do. So it's okay to fight a bit. And normally what I would tell them, please put on your most corrupt hat when doing that activity so that you can think of the worst case scenario. And even better if you have some audit findings as a guidance so that at least you look at the audit finding, then you know, there's a gap in this process and whatnot. Then probably they can add on the controls. And sometimes sometimes they might think that, the risk is high. For example, procurement is always procurement, right? But sometimes I feel sorry for the procurement folks because they tried their best to make sure that everything is under, well controlled and whatnot. But still there will be like leakage and whatever because you are managing human. So the control does not limit to what human can do. Like what Cik Hatta said, is the grit, the kolbu. Kan? If they have that ill intention, they want to do something.
It will happen.
It will happen because corruption is a criminal offense.
Right.
And it takes an ill intention to prove that you are doing a corrupt thing. So sometimes you can have the best control in the world, but if they can manipulate, they can beat the system, they can collude beramai-ramai berjemaah.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's
Nothing
it.
much then.
Nothing much
We
to be
have
done.
heard that from Puan Nuri as what are the challenges and criticism she's facing in this industry, right? From your point of view, Chahata, running a consultancy firm and academy, what are the common challenges and criticism
All right.
regarding our topic today? We're reaching the end of our podcast, but we would like to hear from you as well.
Sure. Now, before I'm answering that question, I'm accountable for the second question given by you before this, right? I'm going to have to finish it a little bit because saya tak jawab lagi yang the you part, right?
Right.
Pasal yang corruption risk assessment tadi memang thank you to Puan Nuri sebab bagi additional notes yang sangat-sangat bermakna. Now that you part tadi, undertake control measures sebenarnya is all about policies, procedures and of course how do you comply with it. Policies, procedures ni dia boleh jadi macam-macam. Dia boleh jadi codes, dia boleh jadi guidelines and what not. Tapi yang saya masih ingat semasa saya di Institute Integrity dulu, hari ni saya bagi satu pro bono consultation kepada para pendengar. At least dapat something hari ni kan. Now, sebenarnya untuk bangunkan adequate procedure dengan ABMS ni, kita perlukan satu polisi, 8 prosedur dan 4 revision. Itu sahaja. Kalau saya boleh berkongsi, satu polisi itu adalah polisi anti rasuah, anti bribery, anti corruption. Okay, a statement is just suffice, rather than you nak ada pembukuan polisi macam kita buat zaman dulu-dulu. Bahasa orang sekarang zaman dulu-dulu. A statement will be just adequate untuk menjawab kepada keseluruhan sistem. And then the 8 prosedur itu adalah yang pertama, pastikan ada corruption risk assessment. That is a so-called register, the living document. The second one is the code of business ethic. The third one is code of conduct untuk employee. Tadi code of business ethic untuk orang luar. Procurement lah, usually nak deal dengan vendors, suppliers and what not. Dan yang keempat adalah conflict of interest procedure. Yang kelima, whistleblowing channel and complaints management. Puan Nuri sebut tadi tu memang dah tepat dah tu. Ada whistleblowing channel yang kita kena dasarkan terus kepada 8 channel SPRM, dan satu lagi kena ada complaints management untuk grievances and what not jugalah. Alright? And then yang keenam adalah RTA, Referral to Authority. Ini terkait dengan whistleblowing channel tadi. And then yang seterusnya adalah gift, hospitality, donation and similar benefits. Dan yang terakhir, ni penting sangat-sangat sebab dia memang termaktub dalam dokumen-dokumen diperlukan when it comes to adequate procedure untuk pendakwaan, LOA, Limits of Authority. Di sini pun banyak benda yang kita tengok teraruh kepada potensi rasuah. Alright? And 4 revision yang lain, kita boleh tengok, kita boleh revise kita punya agreement, procurement, kita boleh revise kita punya integrity, pledge kita, dan juga beberapa perkara yang lain kita boleh buat untuk memperkasa dan memperkayakan lagi compliance kita. Now, menjawab soalan yang diberikan oleh Puan Moderator tadi, challenge dia lain tidak bukan, macam tadi saya sebut, satu, make sure challenge yang paling besar adalah untuk menetapkan perundangan dalam diri rather than the ISO practices semata-mata. Ingat tu, ramai orang, you boleh cakap saya nak lari perundangan lah, nak buat ISO saja hari ni. Next, you akan rasa tertekan kerana istilah-istilah tersebut, kerana pendirian anda itu. Guys, if you think that compliance is expensive, you try non-compliance. Dan you baru tahu sakit tak sakit, sebab you'll go for the syarikat. Sebab the section 70 capital A go for syarikat. Then after that, yang kedua adalah kompetensi lah. Kompetensi ni apa? Knowledge ataupun tidak, experience ataupun tidak. Okay, seseorang individu tu dalam membawa the so-called implementation. Kalau tak ada, boleh jadi hancur belana. Termasuklah board of directors. Kalau tak ada that so-called knowledgeable untuk tengok benda ni, nak buat instruction and what not, nak tengok policy, nak govern it, itu pun akan jadi masalah. Dan yang terakhir tadi, saya tak boleh sebut benda ni sebab saya datang daripada konsultan juga. Tapi kena ingat tuan-tuan dan puan-puan yang mendengar podcast ini, there is a difference between consultant, competent one, dengan charlatan. Consultant, orang yang berkompeten, ada ilmu tentang hal sedemikian. Kalau nak ambil mereka, bagus. Kena buat apa? Due diligence terlebih dahulu.
Yes.
Tapi kalau you terpilih charlatans, you akan merosakkan segala-galanya dan akhirnya dia akan memberi barah dalam syarikat. Kerana mereka datang sebagai seorang yang scam dan menjanjikan perkara-perkara yang tidak bagus kepada syarikat tetapi bertopengkan mengatakan mereka adalah konsultan. Ini sedikit sebanyak challenge yang kita ada dalam di waktu sekarang.
Yeah, I'm gonna add also. I'm always adding.
No worries, more the merrier.
Okay, so basically like what the 8 policies that Cik Hatta mentioned just now is well and good. Plus, I think some company, they would have some focus on policy when dealing with third party and also dealing with public officials. I think you need to have a clear guideline on that because that is where the exposure will happen on the risk. And then secondly, some companies, they claim that they have policy, but then the policy is like 30-40 pages. Actually, policy do not have to be like 30-40 pages. You can just do it in half page, and if you have no clue of how to do it, just if you want to have a look in the ISO, there will be about 9 elements dalam the ABC policy punya clause 5.2. Yeah. And then on top of that, on due diligence is interesting because I think due diligence normally only HR will do upon hiring and recruitment. But I think due diligence should be established when onboarding of third party. In fact, companies are worried, how much money they want to spend if they use external solution provider for due diligence. There's a lot out there. I mean, I have tried more than 10 external solution provider. So basically for Malaysian company, you can also make use of electronic system tapisan keutuhan that is hosted by MACC and it's free. For the podcast listener out there, because I don't know how to promo, but this is what I'm going to promote. First is the MS 2764. The secondly, do sign up for that ESTK due diligence. You can screen up to 2,000 entities and 2,000 corporates a day, and they are certified ISMS, if I'm not mistaken, and they will reply within like less than 14 days. Actually, it helps. So at least you screen the entity on the S2 date. So if you have additional budget, company may want to opt for companies like Dance Bradstreet lah, will check lah. I mean, there's a lot ethics based and whatnot. There's a lot in the market right now that is specifically for global companies, and also for you to check on sanction, on adverse media, which is very helpful. And the due diligence requirement is already stated in undertake control measures as well as a specific requirement for companies. You must conduct due diligence screening, not just to your own employees, new recruitment, but also to your directors. Appointment of new directors, new board and whatnot. Critical roles need to have that. And even when you do mergers and acquisition, it's very important to include that. And on top of that, like you mentioned just now, having to have a revision in contracts and agreement, it is good to also include the element of anti-bribery and corruption in the clauses, in the survival terms, in the agreement and whatnot, plus integrity pledge. Like a lot of companies, I think now is common that, you must sign integrity pledge lah, whatever. Right. But from my experience throughout these years, some bigger companies, they will not want to sign a pledge that comes from a smaller company. So best for you to have a mutual approach, because this really takes some level of competency, mutual understanding and negotiations. Because sometimes, because of their stuck of not wanting to sign the pledge and whatnot, the contract will be stuck for years and years. So I think that is a good thing that Encik Hatta mentioned on the hospitality benefits, hospitality, entertainment, gift and similar benefits, because there will be a situation where company will get requests from the government, and that will trigger a red flag for corporate liability, because you have to manage that. And it can be quite sticky at times. So it's good to have like independent party or a committee to sit on it, to discuss and to evaluate whether company is able to sponsor and what are the criteria. Is it for the well-being of the nation? Will it add to the benefit of education, of environment and such and such? And it has to be documented, it has to be minuted, and the decision have to be made collectively to ensure transparency. Because I think having adequate procedure itself is not adequate. You need to prove, have to have evidence, documentation, and to ensure transparency as well.
Yep.
Thank you, Puan Nuri, for that insightful input as well. So technically, I came here today with very minimal understanding to the topic, to be honest. Now that I actually understand better on how the trust principles go in line with the Section 17A of the MACC Act, thank you. I'd like to thank to our speakers today, Puan Nuri and Encik Hatta, for sharing your insights on this very important topic that I assume many wouldn't know much about. So to all our listeners today, remember that understanding and compliance with Section 17A is not merely just a legal obligation, quoting from both Puan Nuri and Encik Hatta, but it is a step towards fostering a culture of integrity in your organization. So guys, we uphold zero tolerance to bribery and corruption. So I'd like to thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you next time in our next episode. Thank you.
Thank you.